I want to say thank you to everyone for being here. I know it's the beginning of the semester and there's a lot going on, and I really appreciate it. So before I get started, I wanted to ask, how many people are familiar with trauma-informed care, what that means? Okay, so maybe about a quarter of the room, half the room. So we'll be talking about that today, and also about adverse childhood experiences and some of the different experiences that I've had globally, locally, and how it all ties together. So for those who know me, I love coffee, and that's why I had to include coffee in the title somehow, because it's truly amazing to me how we're all more connected than we realize, and how coffee is the common thing that draws a lot of people together, especially with this type of work that we're doing. A lot of people who have similar interests, I've had coffee with people that are from all different backgrounds, all different life experiences, and this is truly the thing that draws us all together. To start out with, you may be looking at some of these images and wondering, who are these people and what does all this have to do with each other? So, any thoughts, ideas? When you look at these images, what comes to mind?
Vulnerable populations.
Mm-hmm.
And diverse populations.
Yes. Anybody else? What comes to mind when you see these images? What's the first thing that comes to mind?
Trauma. There's something traumatic happening.
Yes. So I always have to look at things through my trauma-informed lens. And of course, this is the thing that draws it all together, is all of the images or situations that you see there have something to do with trauma and being trauma-informed. So the lady in the top corner, you see her picture, her mugshot. She has an ACEs score of 10, which we'll be talking about what the ACEs score means and what that is. So this is a person who has been through every imaginable horror known to man, and her name is Tonya Kane. She's in a documentary called Healing Neen, which I highly recommend everyone watch and you can find on YouTube. The man that's in the middle, Kevin Hines, he jumped off of the Golden Gate Bridge, tried to commit suicide, but he survived. He has bipolar disorder, and he felt like when he was growing up that his family didn't understand, and he wasn't seen, he wasn't heard, people didn't understand his story. The children in the bottom, these are refugee children. You can see they're kind of just hanging out in the refugee camp there. And I had to include the picture on the bottom right-hand side, I guess your right-hand side, because it's something I tell my nursing students all the time, that when you are dealing with people who've been through trauma, if you look at anyone that you meet, are you going to know what they've been through in their life just by looking at them? Are you going to know whether they've been in situations where they might have been made to feel uncomfortable, where someone said something negative to them? You're not going to know just by looking at them. So this is why I always say you have to treat every person that you meet as if they've been through something, and maybe you might be the only person who was nice to them that day, or you may be the only person who made them feel seen, who made them feel heard. So that's there. Just being aware of things, for example, that's part of trauma-informed care, that asking people for permission before you touch them, because if someone has been traumatized and they're very triggered by that, then even something trying to give someone a hug, for example, that may seem like a nice gesture, but for someone who's been traumatized, that might make them draw back because they're very uncomfortable with that. So that's just sort of a basic introduction to what I'm going to be covering in different scenarios here. So overview of how it started, I'll kind of show you some images and talk a little bit about my experiences in different places. We'll talk more about adverse childhood experiences, what those are, what that entails, trauma-informed care, the current research that I'm doing, resilience, and then why does this matter? What does this mean to me? So some take-home points and resources for people. So how it all started. I've always been fascinated with what makes people who they are. and with what makes each person individual. And I've always known that I've wanted to do something that would allow me to travel around the world and to help people. And I always looked up to Mother Teresa as one of these people who just was always doing something to help someone. Even the people that are the most vulnerable, the people that maybe other aspects of society would consider them to be outcasts, or maybe they wouldn't want to get near them. And so that to me was a motivation, and wanting to go to the places where no one else is going, to serve the people that no one else is serving. So when you see this image, what comes to mind? What do you think that that child has been through just by looking at that picture?
She's totally lost, like she doesn't have any more anchors
Yeah.
anymore.
So looking at that, the population that I feel like I've been most strongly wanting to work with and most drawn to is children who've been through trauma. And so this was one of the starting points, and that kind of got that going, was I did a medical mission, my very first medical mission with the Palestine Children's Relief Fund in 2011. So in my work, I've traveled to Palestine, to the West Bank, and to the Gaza Strip. I've been to Jordan, and I've been to Greece, to the mainland of Greece, as well as the refugees who were coming off of the boats. So in those experiences, having seen children in all these different scenarios, it's like, what is the common thing that's going on between all these children? So that was eye-opening for me, and this picture was taken by a friend of mine, but it kind of just goes back to make you realize that most of the children of the world have something that they've been through, and whether it's a child overseas or whether it's a child in our own community, I'll be touching on that later in my work in the clinic, every child has a need for people to be trauma-informed in order to be able to better serve them in whatever capacity. So whether you are in the healthcare profession, whether you're a teacher, whether you work in a restaurant, whether you work at the grocery store, you know, sometimes we see children or we see people that they may say, oh my goodness, this child is so poorly behaved and they're just wild, and, you know, why is this child being like this? But you may not realize that that child has been through different things and they may not know what their triggers are. So we'll be talking a little bit more about that as well. And here's another image that I wanted to share that I just feel like says a lot about children in different areas and understanding that the trauma that people have been through affects the way that they grow up and the way that their lives are shaped. So what comes to mind when you see this image? Yeah. As many times as I've done this presentation, I've heard something similar from people, and they've all said something similar. So the child that is looking at the camera, the other child that's holding her, it could be her older sister, it could be a neighbor, it could be a cousin. And you don't know just from looking at the image whether this child has family that's with them. But that is something I've seen a lot, even here in my work in the clinic, with families that the children have been taken out of the homes from their biological parents because they're not being cared for properly. The siblings, they try to keep the siblings together, but oftentimes it's like the older sibling or the oldest sibling is having to play the role of either mom or dad because they're trying to be there for their younger siblings. So these are all things to think of, whether it's a child here, whether it's a child overseas. Drawing in the fact that trauma-informed care has to be the overarching theme. So when we say refugees, some of you may know what I'm talking about, but some of you may not. So refugee, we define it as a person who's been forced to flee his or her home country because of persecution, war, or violence, and most likely they cannot return home or are afraid to do so. So in working with that population, I have seen a lot of different scenarios, from families who are resettled and all the families are together to people who have been separated from the rest of their family. And so in recognizing that people have different types of trauma, there's also not just the trauma that a person has been through if they're in a war-torn country, there's the trauma of the migration itself, and then the trauma of being resettled in a new country, not speaking the language, not having a sense of community, perhaps being taken advantage of or being harmed in your new place that you've gone to. So going back to the same thing, when you think of trauma-informed care, you have to look at it as a whole and as a system, not just one person, but how it affects the entire population. So what about this? This image, when you see this, what comes to mind, or what does this make you think about? Part of trauma-informed care is not only looking at the person and saying, okay, what happened to them, but looking at their environment and looking at it as a whole. So these are Syrian refugee children that are living in Jordan, and you can see the area in which they live, that's the refugee camp. These are the most sort of deserted, spread out areas, so this is not the main refugee camp. And for those children, some people may look at it and say, oh, these children are dirty, or they look like they haven't showered, or they look like they, don't have running water, they haven't taken a bath. But you have to realize that when you're working with different populations, you have to look at the basic necessities and their human needs if they're being met as a whole. So these children that we encountered, we were trying to make sure that they had clothing, that they had shelter, that they had shoes, things like that. So in looking at trauma-informed care, it's part of the bigger picture. And so that's just another snapshot of that scenario. So switching gears now to Gaza refugee camp in Jordan, that is where I've done a lot of my research, for which I've received grants, as she mentioned, from ETSU, so very thankful for that. When I started to go to Gaza refugee camp and notice the situation in which these families were living, it was also that overarching theme of there's a lack of trauma-informed care and there's a lack of looking at the bigger picture. So how can we help address that? And how can we help these children and these families that are living here? So just to give you a context, for those of you who may not know, Gaza refugee camp, it's in Jerash in Jordan, and there's almost 30,000 people living in a very, very small area. So can you imagine this hall is, or this room is like their house. So let's say there's one bedroom that's right there, and you may have a mother, father, and 3 unmarried daughters living in that house. And then the next room over, you may have the older son and his wife and their children. And then a door right here, you may have their other brother and his wife and their kids living, and they have a common kitchen and a common sitting area, and there's 20 to 30 people living in one house. Now, I don't know about you all, but can you imagine living with that many family members? I think it would be difficult to feel like you don't have a sense of privacy, like you don't have your own space, like there's not safe places for the children to grow and develop. Lack of education. For example, there's so many children living in the camp that they are having to do double shifts in the schools. So for example, the children who are younger go to school from 8 to 12, and then the older kids go to school from about 1 to 4 or 1 to 5. And there's about 40 to 50 children per classroom. So if you can imagine already how hard it is being a student, trying to learn, trying to have your needs met, imagine all of this amplified with a lot more people in a lot shorter space and not having access to mental health care, to physical health. And, if you're in a situation where an emergency arises, there's no hospital within the camp, so you have to find transportation and try to find a way to get to, access healthcare. So with me being a person who likes to hear people's stories and likes to talk to people, I figured what better way to figure out how we can help them than to actually hear from people what we can do to help them. So we did focus groups. I like qualitative research. So we did 4 different focus groups to ask what are the needs that these people living in the camp have. So we did a little bit of about 10 people in each group and asked them questions, like open-ended questions. So we had the 4 different groups that you can see here. and some of the things, looking at what can we find out in order to better provide trauma-informed care and access to basic human needs. So asking them about what health means to them, physical health, mental health, how they access health, where do they go for healthcare, for medications? If they have life stressors, how do they handle it? What are the dangers they experience? And then their food, job situation, sources of income. And then what do they want people to know? So if you have just heard about this for the first time and you have no idea where this place is or why this is important, what do the people living there want you to know? Because oftentimes it goes back to we're all more connected than we realize. It may seem like, a separate group of people in a separate place and I'll probably never see them, so why does it matter? But in the end, we all want to feel like we have our basic needs met, like we're seen, we're heard, we're cared for. And that's the overarching theme for all of, everything I do. So a lot of different things that we found out from that, and I'll just kind of go over them briefly, is that the people there are hardworking and they try to feel a sense of community and they try to help each other out given their circumstances, but they don't have a lot of resources and a lot of things that are in their favor. So what can we do to, on a trauma-informed level, address that and help provide the services that they need? So we pilot tested World Health Organization quality of life scale and administered that, and we'll be working on that research. And since then, we've been able to open a community center there for the children to where we can do projects with them, where we can do trauma-informed care like art therapy and after-school programs for the kids that are at risk, for example, to be able to get some extra support. So the common theme in all of the places that I've traveled, whether it's abroad, whether it's here, all of the kids that I've worked with, is that they have all had something that's gone on in their life and some type of extra support that they need. So kind of like what I was saying about kids feeling like, well, they just think I'm bad because I'm misbehaving, but not understanding that there's a reason that they are acting the way that they are and that they have certain triggers. So wanting to see how we can better help kids no matter where they are. So how many of you have heard about adverse childhood experiences? So some people have here, okay. Well, for those of you who don't know, and we'll be switching gears a little bit to the next research project that I'm doing, and this is what this is involved with. So adverse childhood experiences are different experiences that children have from birth to 18 years of age, which include physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional neglect, physical neglect, witnessing intimate partner violence in the home, mother treated violently, substance misuse, household mental illness, parental separation or divorce, and incarcerated household member. So there was a study that was done in the 1990s where they kind of correlated what health problems people have currently as adults and how many of these experiences they had as children. And so it was important to note for that study, the ACEs study, that the people that they surveyed, it was across all socioeconomic status, all levels of education, even what they considered to be like better, more affluent neighborhoods. It's not just the people who are living in certain parts of town who have these experiences. So these are something that affect everyone. So the more that they had these adverse childhood experiences, the more that they have physical health problems, the more that they have substance use, the more that they have mental health problems, perhaps turning to substances or unsafe behaviors that are trying to mask what that they've been through. So in looking at trauma-informed care, and that's what it goes back to, is how can each of us recognize not only if we've been through that, but how we can help other people that have been through that and connect them with the resources and not further traumatize people or further trigger people who've been through these experiences. So looking at trauma-informed care, recognizing that as a system, we have to do a better job with trauma-informed care. So recognizing how trauma affects people and the potential paths for recovery. So just because someone went through something when they were younger doesn't mean they're doomed to have problems for the rest of their life or that they're never going to get better. If they have access to resources, to people to help them work through it, chances are they can have a very successful life and help other people who've been through similar things. So recognizing also signs and symptoms of trauma and understanding why people are the way they are. It's not just because, well, they just feel like being hateful. It's maybe something that you're doing, something you're saying, or something that's happening is triggering them, and it's reminding them of something that's happened in the past that's been negative. So looking at even, for example, there was a documentary that we watched in one of my trainings about an after school, it was for kids who have in-school suspension, how they had the classroom set up in such a way where it's able to help them work through things and not make it more like punishing for them. Also, as we talked about, actively resisting re-traumatizing so that you're not going through, not re-traumatizing people through different situations that they've been through. So, as I mentioned before, if someone has been in a situation where they have been verbally abused and you get into an argument with someone, even if it's something trivial, and you start shouting at someone, I have actually seen that happen where that person has just retreated into themselves and not been responsive because someone was shouting at them and they didn't realize that that person was being triggered to when someone close to them was yelling at them when they were a child. So you have to be aware that all of these different aspects can affect people, whether negative or positive. So just briefly, the trauma-informed care approaches, and there's actually what is it that's going on today with SAMHSA? They're doing some kind of workshop today, so they're talking about a lot of these things and how the community is addressing it, but just understanding that if someone comes to you, for example, and they tell you about something that's happened to them, you could be the person that connects them with resources or that helps them get through whatever they're going through if you provide that support. If you don't believe someone, or if you just say you're being dramatic or I don't have time, then that person can feel like there's no one there to support them, and that could be, leading them to get into further feelings of isolation. So collaborating, I really feel like collaboration is something that we can all do better because there's so many groups of people and so many different community resources that are already working on all these different things, but it's like almost in silos. So getting together people who are interested in trauma-informed care and who are already doing these types of things to say, how can we work together in the community to do that? Empowering people, giving people who are in these vulnerable situations a voice to have their needs met, to have their voices heard. So one of the studies that we're doing right now, and this is with Dr. Megan Quinn, Dr. Judy McCook, and Dr. Julia Bernard at ETSU, is we sent out a questionnaire, which if you're a student, you may have received this. A questionnaire we sent out asking students to provide their some demographic information, and then to answer this questionnaire and looking at resilience also. So what we're interested in seeing is there a correlation between people who've been through experiences themselves and wanting to do something to help other people so that other people don't experience what they've been through. Also, clinical practice. I currently work as a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner at Omni, and one of the things that I do is I see the children that are in DCS custody, that are with foster parents or with their adoptive families, to look at how can we help those kids that have been traumatized, that have been abused, that maybe their parents were on drugs or they neglected them or they did these things. How can we help them to get through what they've been through, to be more successful in school, to have better behavior, and to also feel like people are there to help them? Because the hardest thing for me is to see a kid with so many behavior problems feeling like well, no one wants to help me and no one cares, because they hear repeatedly from foster families or from other people, why are you such a bad kid? Why are you doing this? So one of the things I try to do is just even asking the kids, what's making you angry? What's making you upset? Because for those of you who have children or remember when you were little, sometimes it's not easy for kids to say why they're mad. But if you can help the child to understand what their triggers are and what's going on, then you can help correct the behavior. Because I do the medication management side of things, but I always tell people, if I could make a magic pill that makes everyone nice to everyone and makes kids stop misbehaving, then I would be really rich, but I can't do that. So that's where we all have to work together to understand how can the parents and the teachers and the therapists and the prescriber and everyone work together to say, okay, what's going on that's causing these behaviors, that's causing this child not to make good grades, that's causing this child to have problems to where they're fighting with other children, and how can we correct that and address that together? One of the things that I found fascinating is when children don't have that sense of stability or have that sense of, in their life having something that's just constant for them and having people that they can turn to is Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts or after-school programs, or even if, for example, they're in a foster care system and they're going to different families and going to different situations, having something that's stable in their life can be the thing that helps them get through it. So recognizing that, and how can we work with community resources to help, whether it's children who are in foster care or even people who've been through, for example, situations when they were children and now they're using substances. It's so easy for us to say, oh, look at this person, they're a druggie or they're an alcoholic or whatever the case is. But if you see the documentary that I was talking about, Healing Neen, she talks about a lot of her experiences and what she's had to go through and see, and how sometimes people use substances because it helps them to try to get those images or those situations out of their head. And while that may not be the healthiest, obvious coping mechanism, it's the only way some people know how to deal with things. So that's why if you're going to be in any type of profession where you're going to be working with people in the future, you have to look at the bigger picture and say, okay, how can we help people without blaming them? So one of the things that I like to focus on in everything that I do is resilience. That's one of the questionnaires that we have with our survey that we sent out, is different resiliency questions. So how come some people go through a traumatic event and they end up with PTSD, whereas other people go through something and they end up being stronger than ever and being resilient? So the American Psychiatric Association defines resilience as the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress. So how do people bounce back from what they've been through? So let me ask everyone a question. Think about the most resilient person or people you know, the strongest people you know. What are the characteristics that makes them resilient? And you can just shout out some answers, just general answers.
They know how to get help from other people quickly. They're quick to ask for support.
Yeah, they are able to ask for support when they need it. That's very good. What else?
Determination.
Determination that they're going to keep going no matter what happens and not let one thing or multiple things define their situation to get through it, yeah.
They seem to be at peace.
They seem to be at peace. Tell us a little bit more about that. What makes them at peace? How do they get there?
Due to their resilience, that's why they are there.
Yeah. For people, that can be different ways. That can be through, for some people, it's through their faith. For some people, it's ultimately going back to what can I control and what can I not control? So when you let go of the things you have no control over and stop worrying about them and stop obsessing over the things that you aren't able to change, that definitely makes people resilient. Because you can only change how you perceive things and how you react to things, not other people or situations. So, in all of the places that I've gone, all the people that I've encountered, that's been something very fascinating to me, is how people do have that sense of resilience. And so I wanted to share this picture. This was on one of my medical missions. She drew a picture for me. She's about 11 years old, and she's from Syria. She's a refugee. And so she drew this picture. Every time I saw her, she would have a smile on her face. And she was just probably one of the most you meet some people and they just have this light that radiates from them, and they just seem like they're a positive source of energy. So she was definitely one of those people, and I'll never forget her. But that, to me, is just the classic example of resilience right there. So a couple of things that I wanted to say is, I like this quote: people will forget what you said, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And parents, be careful what you say to your children, because your words become their inner voice. So being trauma-informed and understanding that the way that you speak with people, not only people that you have met or that you know, but even people that you've never met. Taking time to understand, okay, if someone is being rude to you, or someone cuts you off in traffic, or someone tries to cut in front of you in line at the grocery store, even little things. Understanding that sometimes people have their own things that they're dealing with. They have their own issues, and you don't have to take things personally. So recognizing that and being, like I said, maybe you might be the one person to have been nice to them that day, or the one person to not make them feel worse about something. And definitely understanding that words or actions, like I tell the little kids, it's like a vase. You have a glass vase, and you drop the vase and you try to put it back together. You may be able to glue it together, but the vase isn't going to be how it was before it was broken. So just being aware that what you say and how you say it, even if you don't mean it in a negative way, people can misinterpret that. So why are you all coming to listen to me talk, and what does all of this have to do with anything? Basically, it's like my trauma-informed lens, is the summary. But also, being self-aware, I think, is important, and being able to understand that you are able to help influence other people through what you do, through your trauma-informed care. So one of the things that they have that's available there for everyone is 20 ways to focus on self-care and a self-care plan. And actually, we were just having that conversation before everyone came in, that sometimes it's so easy for us to use social media to be connected with everyone and to try to always, do things and connect with people. But you have to realize, too, that if you're going to be in helping professions, or even if you're not in the helping professions, for your own mental health and for your own resilience and for your own well-being, you have to understand what you can do to take care of yourself. Understand, for example, if you have things that have happened, or if you have triggers, or if you have situations that are really bothering you, how are you going to address that, and how are you going to recognize that so you can communicate to people? Because I can't even tell you how many times I've seen, whether it's children or whether it's adults, people having arguments, disagreements, and then them not even recognizing that, well, this certain thing bothered me, and that's why I got defensive and got mad. It has nothing to do with the person they're arguing at. But if you can recognize that and communicate that to people before it escalates, then that can make a huge difference. And being able to connect people. So whether you're a student, whether you're faculty, whether you're staff, whether you're someone from the community, if you have people coming to you and telling you that something happened to them, or that they're not doing okay with their mental health, or if anything's going on, what are you going to do to help that person or to help yourself if you're going through anything, to get the care that you need, to do self-care, to get resources that'll help you with your mental health and to address, anything that is going on. So looking at it from that perspective, and I really want to draw the point that we're definitely all more connected than we realize. And it's such an honor for me to even be able to see everyone here, because whether it's you had to be here for class or whether you wanted to be here, we all are here together. So my question is, how can we all, work together? I have some resources here that I've included for people. They have some resources for the counseling center. I also put the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And then my question for you is, how can we work together to break stigmas and make trauma-informed mental health care more available to those who need it? So what are everyone's thoughts? I'm going to be ending shortly so we can take time for questions, because I have a patient in the clinic at 1, so I have to head over back there soon. So
I found making an open environment, and my assistant and I spent a lot of time referring students to counseling and sort of making it, normalizing it for them, because there's so much stigma.
Yeah.
And it's had sort of a domino effect where we had a welcome for new students, one of our new groups of students, and one of the older students like gave a big spiel. You get 12 free visits, and it's paid for in your fees, and this is why you should go, and this is what it means, and this is not what it means. So that's been really nice to sort of, you have to change, you have to create a whole culture.
Yeah.
And then you can't do it alone.
Exactly. And that's one of the things that we decided, and it goes back to coffee and conversation. I was having a conversation and coffee with my good friend Ren Allen. I don't know, some of you may know her. She's a makeup artist here locally. But we were talking about how we as a community can do more to address the needs in Johnson City and in the Tri-Cities, working to bring people together to address different issues. And one of the things that we've talked about is mental health care and just really learning about different communities, different cultures, different religions, different groups of people. Because I think when you're able to recognize that although we have our differences, we all at the end want to be seen, want to be heard, want to, feel cared for and loved, then we can definitely connect with each other and do more to make the world a better place. So that's one of the things we do locally, and we've had, different presentations. If anyone is associated with a group and wants to be one of our speakers for the month, or if anyone wants to join, then you all can join our Be Good Human group. I think we have a meeting actually tomorrow. Do you know, Franklin, the information? There's a spoken word poetry thing tomorrow.
In the evenings, some storytelling.
Yeah, so that'll be tomorrow, but that's one thing. So just taking time to talk to people, because even if it's just a simple saying hi to someone and reaching out to someone that you may not have spoken with, that's probably how I met most of the people I know. Hi, I'm Meira, nice to meet you. I just go up to random people, and that's how I get connected with so many different people, just because I'm super outgoing. But one thing I will add here is I have my contact information. And so I see clients at Omni Community Health. If anyone wants to have access to mental health care, doesn't have anyone, if they need therapy, if they need medication management, if you have insurance, no insurance, private insurance, it doesn't matter. There are multiple resources too, but I did want to make that available. So if anyone needs care or knows anyone who needs care, no one should be without mental health care. And I'm more than happy to see you and talk with you and help you in any way I can. So. Oh, and one other thing too that I will mention briefly, we talked about just very briefly is, especially with it being the beginning of the semester and it being the time when, for people who are freshmen or who are new on campus, it's a time when people are a lot more vulnerable. So it's what they call the red zone. So I just wanted to say that, kind of give everyone a heads up, is be aware of your surroundings, being aware of the people around you, and not to be too trusting of, people you meet, because unfortunately, this is a period of time when there's a lot more risk for people being sexually assaulted on campus. So just be aware and know that if you are a survivor of sexual assault and you need care, there's a SANE clinic, and we have resources on campus too. So, any questions? Any comments? You want to add anything?
Meira, how do you work with parents of children that have a high ACEs score in your clinic? What resources do you offer to them, or besides wanting to do something dramatic?
Yeah.
But I mean, just as a parent myself, and as a provider myself, what
Yeah.
are some specific strategies you use?
Well, one of the things is making sure that if the parents have high ACEs scores, chances are the parents have high ACEs scores as well. So kind of just making sure that the parents are being taken care of as well and giving them the resources they need. But it also kind of just depends on what the challenges are and what the resources are that they need. Because there may be people who, I mean, I've had scenarios where there have been children who have high ACEs scores and they've been taken into DCS custody because, for example, their parents don't have stable housing because they lost their job, they lost their home. So one of the things, for example, is connecting people to resources for housing, or resources for clothing, or resources for shelter, or food, or addressing whatever the specific need is. But there are off-campus resources as well as on-campus resources. And so does anyone have any specific ones they can think of that would want to add?
For people who are food insecure, there's Bucky's Food Pantry.
Mm-hmm.
And then I know staff Senate, they have clothing drives at different times of the year so that students can go and get coats and clothing.
Yeah.
I think at one time, one of the units or departments was doing a professional clothing, and they were a closet. With
Yeah.
I think it's under the Bucky's.
The Bucky's
under the
Pantry.
Bucky's
Yeah.
Pantry for students who don't have money or can't afford professional clothes to go for interviews to
Yeah,
jobs
things
out
like
there.
that, resources. I know those are resources on campus, and I'm not sure, were you asking about off-campus resources in the area or just in general? Just in general, okay. Because I think too, usually with, like, I know, for example, with us at Omni, we have case managers, and they kind of do sort of that connecting people to the resources and care coordination type of things as well. So if they're in a situation where they need to have care coordination, that could be an option. So.
Will you speak briefly, because I know you have to go, about your experience with inaccurate reports of ACEs? So oftentimes it's very stigmatizing. You don't want to fill out a paper that says you were a bad parent.
Yeah.
So how do you kind of navigate when you're doing that?
Well, I guess for me, I guess it's really hard to know if people specifically have filled it out the wrong way or the right way, but I would say the biggest thing is to set the environment to where it's already an open environment and it's not judgmental, to where you feel like people would be accurate in what they're reporting and where they feel like they can get the care that they need. Because I think a lot of times if people are hesitant, whether it's opening up about things that they've been through, whether it's opening up about having mental illness, whether it's opening up about the experiences and having high ACEs scores, people are less likely to talk to you if they feel like, you're just going to judge them or you're not going to help them. So I think just going into it with that environment of saying, whatever you've been through, I'm here to help. And I think one of the things I learned from the trainings is one of the most powerful things that you can tell someone is that things that happened to you as a child were not your fault. Because I have worked with so many people who feel like they deserved the bad things that happened to them as a kid because they were a bad child or because they misbehaved or because they did whatever. But when you're a child, you don't deserve bad things to happen. And for anyone who needed to hear that, then I hope you realize that nothing that happened to you as a child was your fault. So, any other questions? Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Well, if you do have questions, you can email me. And so I really appreciate everyone's time and appreciate everyone's attention. And it was very nice to meet you all. So I would stay and chat, but I have to go back to the clinic, so I will be there. But if you do, like I said, need access to mental health care, or if you know anyone else who doesn't have access to mental health care, if you're a student, you can be seen for free at the student health clinic here. But if you don't want to go here, or if you have people off campus who need it, then it's not that far. South Roan Street, it's just like a mile from here. It's down the street. So thank you all. Have a good rest of the day.